Welcome, everyone. It is Friday, April 15th, and this is next installment of our discussion series on Ukraine from Marshall University, West Virginia. We are leading the panel with invited speakers on different aspects, and I'm Victor Fett from Biology Department, and my colleagues will be asking questions and presenting our today's speakers. Just to brief everyone very, very briefly on what is going on, it's 50 days of war, and the war is going on, as everyone can see from the news. The battle for Donbass is being planned on both sides, and we don't know much about what and when will happen, but it looks like it will be very large military operation, probably one of the largest, if not the largest, since the end of Second World War. So they tell us. So right now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, my friend Galina Izkovic from Brooklyn, New York, who is a psychologist and a poet. And I know her mostly through our Russian expat literary affairs and journals, but she is doing extremely important work right now with people in Ukraine directly. So I give her a microphone. Please, Galina, introduce yourself and tell us everything you want.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm afraid I won't be able to tell you everything because it will take a long time. These were very long 50 days. It feels like one unending day, and maybe now is a good time to pause and reflect and try to understand, kind of see where we find ourselves. Because I started, the backstory is that I've been working with Ukraine, with professionals in Ukraine since 2014, 2015. I visited Kiev and I taught a seminar there, and I've been teaching the developmental affect-based approach to work with autistic children and children with developmental delays since that time, some in person, some online. And I spent my time online and in person, and naturally it kind of morphed into the COVID work, which was fully online, and then it became in person again. So when the war started, my first immediate inclination was to check on all the people I knew, and I was working with my developmental specialists in Ukraine, but also I was working with the team of people who provided psychological support to the east, to Donbass region since 2014, and that was like a side project and side relationship, and this relationship would come alive here and there when they would need the materials, or let's say they would need support for their Belarusian colleagues. We had these episodes of working together as well. But actually, I must say that psychologists who were providing this support since 2015 were ready, pretty much ready for the war. And this work never stopped. And that's why the military is so prepared, because they feel that the war just continues. It's in the active stage. So back to my work, my first inclination was to check on everyone I know and to see what's needed. And for first probably 2 weeks, I turned myself into the human hub, like relaying information. Okay, we need this material, we need this level of support, connecting dots, connecting people, finding new people who would jump on board, seeing my frantic activity on Facebook. I was never that active on Facebook in my entire life. And seeing that I'm looking for resources via mass emails. And I must say that people, all kinds of people from different walks of my professional life and personal life too, would jump on board and provide whatever they could provide. And I feel that this war is really unique. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. Well, what do I know? This is my first big war. So maybe each war is like that, but I feel that people are not waiting for the organized effort. People are not waiting, to form an army. People are the army. People take sides and people start fighting. And I'm happy to see also that there is some growth, grassroots growth coming from Russia, and people jump in and they feel apprehensive, but they ask to give them small tasks to work on, no matter how scared they are, which I think is a good sign that there will be some dynamic there as well. But once again, back to what's needed, what else is unique from my perspective in this war, that people are so psychologically minded, so acutely aware of what needs to be done to stay sane, to be okay after the war. And people actively ask for, initially people were asking for psychological first aid, and myself and colleagues were providing those quick webinars here and there, and also running small groups as needed with different groups of people, with volunteers, I also have these parents of kids with developmental disabilities who are now all over the world, basically, or at least all over the Ukraine and Europe, in transit. Some are in occupied cities, some are sheltering in place, some are lost and they don't know what decision to make. It's a big part of this decision-making process because no one can make decisions for them, but as they talk through their concerns, they arrive to the only right decision that they can make in this war. And it's all unpredictable. And then the requests are changing, because in the beginning there was a request, okay, so how do you talk to children about war? How do you explain what happened? Then how do you deal with being underground for such a long time? How do you stay sane seeing that people die around you? It's that simple for civilians. It's unconscionable. It's crazy that people have to deal with that in the 21st century. The next request, and also, also on top of it, it's constant request for content, creating new content from scratch, writing fact sheets, because people beg for fact sheets. They need this guidance. They ask for this guidance. What do I do with the war stress and war stupor? What do I do if I'm in the city that's being under siege? How do I behave? How do I stay alive? How do I preserve life of people around me? And this, I never in my professional life did I have to answer a question, how do I dress so I can go unnoticed to the corner to my neighbor and come back alive and not raped? Because rape became, last 2 weeks, a huge sign in my life is work with rape victims. Rape became a hourly affair in my professional life. The amount of atrocities that happen in this war, what we see on CNN is a sliver of what's actually happening. And it's absolutely traumatizing, and it's very difficult for people who deal with it. It's very difficult for helpers, for grassroots people who jumped in, for a medical profession. They are not psychologists. They are not used to working with that. And another big part of it is that nothing that is being done can be finished and you can feel good about it and say, whew, done, achieved, next task. It all happens at the same time. It's the multitasking beyond human comprehension, because of so much happening all over Ukraine in different places. So that's the gist. And the rest is side projects. We have the side project of sensory toys being delivered to refugees who ran across the continent with their kids who need a lot of support. Kids on the spectrum. Now I became involved in the meds delivery to towns around Zaporizhia that really need medications, and they ran through their supplies, and they have their cardiovascular seizure disorder patients who really need medications. And we were, today actually, there was a small success. A group of people received their little parcel of medication, but now we're planning a bigger one, and hopefully it gets there. But it's all trial and error, and well, there are more errors, but we need to continue to try. I guess that's the gist.
Thank you so much, Galina. Victor, are you muted?
Thank you. I'm just thinking maybe anyone from the panel right now has a question. If Galina stays for a while, maybe we have more questions from the chat. Kateryna just typed in the chat that Galina made an excellent point that people are not waiting for others to organize support. Instead, there are grassroots movements starting everywhere. So I guess my question is, do you know of others, of many others, or you just don't have time to find out?
Oh, I definitely know of so many other efforts. And day 2 of this war, the Washington Post, one of the writers, the senior writer from Washington Post, reached out asking for comment. And at the time, I was not numb with pain and disbelief. And I said something, but then I said, wait a second, don't publish it yet. More things are happening. And she stayed with me for 10 days, and they followed all my connections of the first 10 days of war, and they published an article. And after that article, there was the next wave of people who read the article, easily found me on Psychology Today, reached out, and they brought resources, they brought problems, they brought solutions. And it's a huge network of people that is being created. And I hope this war will be over, and there will be one day of big reunion of these people around the globe. I have no idea. I spoke to Budapest yesterday to 2 Israeli doctors. I don't know how they got my information, but it was a lot of fun because we were able to actually help somebody over there in Budapest in the hotel for refugees. And this is just incredible. People are great, and I'm fortunate to have met all these wonderful people. Probably didn't even know the depth of the resources that it's opening up.
Galina, I think what you're doing is so important because people who have autism, neurodivergent people, are more likely to be victims anyway, even under the best of circumstances. And certainly in war, and neurodivergent people are like everyone else. There's a wide range. There's a wide range of abilities, a wide range of behaviors and stuff. But there are definitely people in the neurodivergent autism community that are much more vulnerable, like even more so than the average citizen. So thank you so much for this great work. I'm wondering, does Ukraine have, and you may not know this, may be an unfair question, but like here in the United States, we do have agencies dedicated to supporting people who have autism and their families. Does such a thing exist in Ukraine? And is that organization being supported as far as you know?
Well, these organizations exist. There is Autism Ukraine organization that is connected to Europe Autism organization, and we organized the conference in 2018. They organized for us, and I was able to bring a group of professionals from here to speak there. But also, I have my own group of people who support courses internationally online, and they took it and they ran with it, and they developed their own centers, and it's growing, and people are really professionally mature. People are maturing, and people there are just so, they imbibe everything. They're like sponges. They really want to learn. I have a lot of respect for Ukrainians and for the growth that I was fortunate to witness. And I continue to work with all these people, and we invent new programming from scratch. And in the first 2 or 3 weeks, we were able to put in place a little sequence of online events. And somebody is doing art therapy with them, and somebody else is doing music therapy with moms, and a separate session with kids. And somebody else, and we had a family doctor who came and gave them a quick talk, and then spoke with moms individually, because people are not going to see the doctors, and the range of psychosomatic problems that they're dealing with is, I'm sure, pretty wide. But whatever's going to happen next, we don't even know, because as we know from the World War II experience, chronic conditions got better for the time of the war. Chronic illnesses stopped. Those people just fell off the medical radar, which was incredible. And it happens with the autistic community too, because these kids, quote unquote, behave. But this is shock. This is not normal. There will be a payday for all these symptoms. So it's important to support people as we go. Yeah, Anara.
I have a quick question. Can you tell us what international organizations involved in similar projects, or how they're dealing with this? I mean, the gender violence?
I probably don't have an answer to that. I'm definitely in touch with UNICEF, and also we have the small international group, the initiative group helping victims, or trying to help victims in terms of psychological support. But right now they're not ready for that. It's goes stage by stage. And actually, I am looking, maybe you will help me, I am looking for a place that would be a sanctuary for women in the United States, because nobody can tell them where to go. They will choose where they want to go, or maybe they will choose to stay in Ukraine. But those who might make it to the United States need to know where to go. And so far, no one, I think, came forward. No one offered. But I'm sure that there will be places and organizations like that offering sanctuaries.
Thank you. I will communicate.
Thank you, Anara. I'm reading questions from chat. First, I go to Karen Petron's question. She's asking about the rapes. If Galina, you try to comment on circumstances and content in which this has become widespread, what are the witnesses saying? Can you tell us briefly what is the situation?
Well, it sounds like, well, some people believe that it was kind of their playbook. But I think it also depends on the specific groups and regiments that took specific towns and little villages, and some were more cruel and some were less cruel. And I think that the northern direction is not as bad as Bucha and some other places around Bucha. And let's hope that there will be a day and these girls and women and kids are talking to the law enforcement in Ukraine, and hopefully there will be a day when they will be able to identify these people and name them. But I don't know if I'm answering the question, but.
Thank you. Chris is asking, can you please tell us about your background a little bit? How does your background as social worker help you to see this war differently than most of the lay people do?
Yeah, well, My background is I've been doing this job for the last 25 years, more or less. And I have 2 tracks. I'm a social worker, psychotherapist, providing psychotherapy to all ages. I was kind of born and raised in an agency, and agency work is like community mental health center is like the open door. Whoever comes, you have to be there and you have to adjust and work. And I worked in the agency, then I was doing the admin supervisory work in the agency, and then I ran an agency, and now I'm in private practice, kind of retired, but also retired from that pace. But my skills are still there. And the crisis skills are still there. After 9/11, I got involved in the work with 9/11 victims, with families, and this work also kind of came handy. And at some point, the city of New York finally, by 2008, the city of New York realized that they needed to form their own version of med course for psychologists and therapists, and they did. So I'm a part of that. So I was a part of some major disasters, 9/11, Sandy. So I know I have this kind of crisis work training, but also the big part of my life is teaching and practicing the affect-based developmental approach, work with kids. So I have this diverse background that kind of helps me to jump in and do whatever needs to be done. But once again, I feel that people are aware that they need support. People know what's going to happen next. People learn the lessons of the previous big wars, when the only diagnosis was shell shock. People don't want to experience PTSD symptoms. They want to get better. They want to build on the resilience, and I want to practice in this work based on the resilience model. Just the other day, I had this little back and forth with somebody on Facebook, because I worked with workplace options, content developer, and we put together a little article for parents. How do you help your kids if you're distressed? So I put up the Russian version on Facebook, and somebody responded, this is so unprofessional of you to offer advice. People need to go to a professional, but that's not necessarily true, because 75 to 80% of people will recover. I mean, psychologically. The psychological wounds will heal. We need to come from that perspective. We need to recover. And the classical Russian and Soviet psychiatry would come from the pathologizing perspective. And I really don't like that. So the person kind of realized what that he was recognized as the Russian practicing psychologist, and he disappeared. But yeah, we can't pathologize what's happening. We can't pathologize this war. We can't pathologize victims. We just need to support them through difficult times and hope that they will learn from what's happening. They will understand what's happening with them. They will support each other. And support is great. And this is very healing. To me, it's really healing when some things kind of happen. Wow, we made this tiny thing happen. Tiny. Somebody got a sensory blanket and he had a quiet night. And we don't know what's going to happen with these people tomorrow. But tonight, we help these people. It's a great feeling, something to hold on to go through the next day. And I do believe that these things help. It's a sense of control and normalcy.
Can I say, I wanted to ask you that question because my wife is a social worker too, and I think it's very important that we have a social worker on this panel with an international perspective too. so that people in our audience understand as well that social workers are out there to plug people into the available resources. They understand how to navigate the system, governmental and non-governmental organizations, as well as give therapy. So thanks so much for your work, Galina.
Yeah, thank you. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Galina. This is very, very important and very touching. We would like you to come back to our panel maybe in a few weeks to when things will start looking differently, we hope. And thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing. If you have time, stay with us, and we might have more questions. We're moving to next speaker now, which is Dr. Korobkov. Chris, are you introducing Andrei?
You bet. So I wanted to introduce everybody to Dr. Andrei Korobkov, who is a well-respected author and professor from Middle Tennessee State University. He's actually been in the media quite a bit recently. He's been interviewed on various programs, and so he's been kind of a go-to guy to understand this war even better. He writes about and teaches about nationalism, state and nation building, comparative migration policies, interethnic relations, minority politics, and a whole host of other things, and numerous publications in multiple languages. If you go to his website, you can see all of them. I wouldn't have enough time to mention them here. It would take 20 minutes at least. So I wanted to introduce you to the group, Dr. Korobkov, and see if you can tell us some of your most recent insights about what's happening on the ground there in Ukraine.
Thank you, Chris. Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I have to say I was preparing for a little bit different format in a sense of dealing with colleagues in political science or international relations. But I would try to adjust in a sense that some of the things I say might not be that interesting and be purely academic. Yet still, what can we say about the recent developments? The introduction was that we don't really know what's going on. It turns out that on February 21st, we have found a lot of information, and it turned out that practically all analytics dealing with Russia were wrong. They were wrong on a number of points. First of all, remembering traditional Churchill's definition of the Kremlin politics, it's two bulldogs fighting under a carpet in a dark room. Well, it turned out to be, very far from reality. It turned out that there was just one very big bulldog sitting out in the open, and all the theories about the Kremlin towers struggling for influence groups, and so on, they were totally worthless. And nobody expected that Putin had absolute control over the political pyramid that equals, or maybe in some respects even exceeds, the power of Stalin. On February 21st, we saw the meeting of the Russian National Security Council, and it turned out that not only all officials of the cabinet are willing to say anything the number one wants, they are openly scared of him. And that was a real surprise even to people who were specifically studying the Kremlin. Second finding came from not only Putin's speeches, but also from his previous articles. And basically, on the one hand, he has very clearly stated that he did not consider Ukraine to be a legitimate state, and Ukrainian nation a legitimate construct and phenomenon. And it became clear that Putin was going to build a single pan-Slavic state that would include three nations as a single one. So Great Russians, small Russians, Ukrainians, and White Russians, Belarusians. So that is his real idea. It is clear that he is strongly influenced by Alexander Dugin and a number of other conservative thinkers in the Russian intellectual conservative establishment. And he sees himself as a historical figure who would fulfill this historical mission, unify three Slavic Christian nations. In this sense, those who were writing before that he was trying to rebuild the Soviet Union or even the Russian Empire were wrong, because this is a very different idea. Both the USSR and the empire presumed the existence of core and the periphery with ethnic and other distinctions. To him, there was no distinction between Russians and Ukrainians, and he had to break the mistake that was made 30 years ago. And the third finding was also interesting. It came from both his writings, his speeches, starting with his Munich speech in February 2007, exactly 15 years ago, when he basically said that the system that was ruling the world for 500 years, the Eurocentric system, and especially its extreme form, the Western total hegemony, led by the US since the collapse of the Soviet Union, was coming to an end, and Western monopoly had to be destroyed. And Russia, in his view, was becoming a lead country that would, well, initiate the collapse of this system and the formation of a new system based exclusively on the absolute definition of sovereignty of great powers. And a lot of that was a big surprise to everybody, including people very close to him. It was clear. And it also became clear that Putin has fallen to some extent a victim of the system that he has built, a victim of a system of absolute power. It turns out that he found himself in an information bubble when even the uppermost officials were simply afraid to report the real situation on the ground to him. And he started to live at some point in a kind of corroded virtual reality. So on February 21st, Putin makes his declaration. Everybody understands that war is inevitable. Yet there are very sharp discussions among experts, what kind of war. Some thought, and I have to say honestly that I was among those people, that Putin would continue to play cat and mouse game while creating tensions, demanding concessions, humiliating Biden, among other things, while forcing him to come out, announce that, well, war would come very soon, then nothing happens, then again, tensions are created, and so on. Yet there were people who were saying that there would be a war, but their expectation was that either Putin would take total control over the Donbass area, or he would create a land corridor to the Crimea. That meant capturing, first of all, Mariupol, and then, well, moving towards the, the peninsula. What happened took everybody by surprise. And now there will be lots of people claiming that they predicted it, they knew for sure that it would happen. Not a single expert, either in the military or in intelligence or in the academy, predicted the scale of this invasion. So invasion starts, and it proceeds on all the border of Russia, from the sea and from the territory of Belarus. Clearly, it becomes clear very soon that Putin indeed was a victim to this information bubble, because he expected, first of all, in the Russian-speaking areas such as Kharkov, that his troops would be met with flowers and there would not be any resistance. Because it became clear within hours that nothing like that was happening. The second stage of invasion started. It continued to proceed on a very wide scale, but now it was increasingly using heavier and heavier weapons and more harsh ways in which, well, both the Ukrainian military and the civil population was treated. Again, it became clear approximately a month into the invasion that Russian troops overextended themselves, and they simply did not plan on anything like that. So they were not prepared logistically. So now we see the beginning of the third stage of this operation, and it is clear what's going on. First, the invasion concentrates on in two areas. There will be an attempt to, after final capturing of Mariupol, there will be an attempt to surround the Donbas grouping of the Ukrainian military with its total extermination. So troops will move northwards from roughly Mariupol towards Kharkov. If they manage to do what they plan to do, there will be a bloodbath. Why? Because first, Ukraine has the best military formations in this area, and second, most of the voluntary battalions are also concentrated in this region. And for Putin, it is clear from his speeches, from his ratings, battalions symbolize what he hates the most. This is what he calls the Nazi groupings, and he intends not simply to defeat them, he intends to exterminate them physically. So I expect a very high level of violence. If they manage to achieve their goals, and again, we don't know whether it would happen, there would be a second sub-stage movement along the coastal line of Ukraine towards Odessa. And if Odessa is captured, then Russian troops will get to the border of Moldova. And not simply the border of Moldova, but the border of the so-called Transnistrian Moldovan Republic, also controlled by pro-Russian forces and having Russian troops stationed in its territory. And still, even though I discuss these plans, which are more or less clear, nobody still can figure out. Again, if they claim they can, don't believe them. Nobody can figure out what is the final game plan. Because, initially there was an idea after the invasion started, okay, Putin will take Donbas, Lugansk and Donetsk regions in the administrative borders of Ukraine. That was his claim on the 21st. That meant that he wanted to expand the territories of these self-proclaimed republics approximately threefold. They held only 1/3 of the respective oblasts. Then there was an expectation that he would create a land corridor to Crimea. Then there was an expectation that he would want to establish total control over the so-called left bank Ukraine. That means the territory to the east of the Dnieper River. And then, that he would go even further, would intend to take the left bank Ukraine plus all the Black Sea coast of Ukraine. The problem is that on the one hand, he doesn't have success that he expected. On the other, still the final plan is not clear. Ironically, the major result of the Putin action was just opposite to what he expected. While trying to create a greater Russian nation, he has created a Ukrainian nation. He created a very strong Ukrainian identity. And now even the majority of Russian speakers have turned away from Russia and for the most part support the Ukrainian state. That's the historical irony of what has happened. Meanwhile, what is the population of Ukraine right now? What we are talking about? When the Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine was the second largest republic, having 52 million people. Of these 52 million people, roughly 20% were ethnic Russians. And the rest of the population was divided among, mostly Russian speakers, dual speakers, and Ukrainian speakers. And this, difference was evolving from the east to the west of the country. Different parts of Ukraine, joined modern Ukraine at different historical times, the same way they joined the Russian Empire and then the USSR. And the West was the last part to become part of Ukraine. It happened in 1939, 1940. And resistance to the Soviet rule continued until 1955. This was happening under the conditions of Stalin's rule, very clearly cruel, and in a situation when Western Ukraine bordered on Warsaw Pact members, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania. Under the current conditions, these regions border on NATO members, and that makes, Putin's future plans a total puzzle. Either he intends to divide the country and take a part of it, or he guarantees himself a continuous civil war, guerrilla warfare, and what we see already now, massive, civil disobedience campaign. And this is even if his plans work out. Now, I mentioned 52 million in 1990. The current population of Ukraine before this crisis started was 43.5 million. So it is a tremendous decline that was due to the negative natural growth rates, labor out migration, the loss of territory to Russia in 2014, and the initial refugee flows that at that time, 2014, went in equal numbers to Russia and to the West. Right now, we know that already 4.7 million have left Ukraine, 7 million are in an even worse position. These are the so-called IDPs, the internally displaced persons. And overall, it's more than a quarter of the current Ukrainian population, these two groups. And this is one of the biggest man-made disasters of the post-Cold War periods that continues to expand in scale. And we can expect massive military actions, massive hostilities to take place in Donbass, literally in 2-3 days. All this would start. So this creates a very serious problem, not only for Ukraine, obviously, but it creates both logistical and moral challenges for the West. We know that Poland has accepted more than 2.5 refugees from Ukraine, while Romania and Moldova received more than 500,000 each. But quite frankly, even though there's a lot of talk, and you can turn on CNN or Fox and see and hear a lot about it, major Western countries were not very willing to receive refugees in their territory. We know that Biden administration, with some procrastination, first has extended the legal status of all Ukrainians in American territory for 18 months. And now Biden declared that he was willing to accept 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. Yet again, compared to 4.7 million, this is a pretty small number. And we have to see whether this works out well. Last year, Biden established a quota for the refugee acceptance of 125,000, and less than a half of this quota was fulfilled. So there are issues, and as we all know, immigration right now is a very tense political topic, and it's very hard to move any legislation, even related to Ukrainian crisis, through Congress under the current conditions. The president has some leverage and some discretionary funds, but it remains a very serious problem. Now I see that I am running out of time. I could say a bit more if there is time.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So a little bit more about Russia now. When the crisis started, television was showing a lot of demonstrations, protests going on in Russian cities. A number of well-known figures in the academy, in the arts, have protested the war. Some left the country. And overall, the estimate is that between 1 and 200,000 people left. These are primarily members of various elites. Nevertheless, this picture is to some extent confusing, because polls show not only steady support for the operation, they show the increase of this support. Frequently, when people hear it, they say, it's because the data is falsified, samples are not random, and so on. But if you go to the Russian social networks, such as Vkontakte or Odnoklassniki or others, you see that really there is a very high level of pro-government feeling at that time. So support for Putin started with 61% on February 21st and has grown to 81% recently. This is given by both pro-governmental and independent polling organizations. They all show that roughly 20% of the population strongly opposes the war, but the majority continues to support both the war and Putin personally. And the population, to a large extent, perceives it not as a conflict in Ukraine, but as a conflict of Russia with the West, at least at that time. One of the problems here is the structure of sanctions that were introduced by the West. Sanctions were comprehensive, they were severe, yet the irony of these sanctions was that they were designed to first, hit specific branches of the Russian economy and its financial system, and second, make the life of elite less comfortable. So the first groups that have felt the impact of sanctions were members of the upper elite, the oligarchs, the political establishment, and I am not completely sure that Putin was so upset about it. They de facto have increased this control over those groups. They lost their ability to travel to the West. They lost their property in the West, and thus they fell under even tighter control by the Kremlin. Second, these sanctions have led to the closing of major Western businesses in Russia and the breakup of ties. That meant that started losing their jobs, first of all, members of educated Western classes, first of all, again, located in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The second stage would lead to the bankruptcies of numerous Russian companies, anyhow, having dealings with the West. Again, these will be white-collar groups, to a large extent, Westernized. And only after that, the sanctions will start, hurting the population in general. Yes, it does feel the impact of sanctions because, inflation exceeds 10%, dollar rate became very unstable, and so on. But for the most part, it does not yet influence their lifestyle. It will happen, but this will be moving pretty slowly, and probably they will start seriously feeling it when the fall is coming. Sanctions in general were the most comprehensive, and their scale turned out to be much larger than anything that Putin expected. First of all, he did not expect this level of unity among the Western countries. They, besides hurting the elites, they aim at first of all hitting on the Russian energy sector. Second, Russian financial sector. Well, third, high tech, and this is probably the most harmful. The inability to buy spare parts, the inability to import high tech products, and the inability to buy important computer elements, first of all, electronic chips. This will have a disastrous impact on the Russian economy. Yet again, it will take a year, 2, 3 years. And therefore, while the system of sanctions is pretty comprehensive, it's not clear what will be its short-term impact. And finally, all this will work, including sanctions, if Russia remains more or less isolated. But it is clear that there is a number of players in this game. China is winning under any circumstances, whether Russia loses or wins, because the West in general, global West, global North, weakens itself. While India, Pakistan, Israel, the Gulf countries, Brazil, South Africa, and many others might have no sympathy to what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but look pretty positively at the prospect of the West in general being weakened or at least being humiliated. And well, the most important issue in reality right now is to what extent the West would be able to neutralize other players and prevent them from openly supporting Russia. And to what extent, vice versa, Putin will be able to generate some kind of support. Clearly, China, under no conditions, would want Russia to lose completely. Well, Russia represents a resource base for it, and it's a card in the game against the United States. So we can expect China, whatever it says, to do enough, at least, to save the Putin regime, prevent it from collapsing. Meanwhile, the internal developments are unpredictable, at least at this point. We can say that Putin exercises total control over the elite, total control over the system, and enjoys a pretty high level of support. This can start changing because of economic problems, because of even dissatisfaction of the military with what is going on. Yet again, this might take a pretty long time. So I suppose I am not drawing a very pleasant picture, but this is the reality. So on this,
reality isn't always pretty.
Yeah.
And if I could, I wanted to. There are questions. I know at least one question for you, Andre. But if I could, I wanted to move on to Karen, and then afterwards we can swing back around. Thank you so much for giving us a lot to think about. There's a lot of different players and moving pieces, thinking about the current situation as well as the historical situation. And so Karen Petrone is back with us today, Professor Petrone from University of Kentucky. Thanks again for joining us. She's a historian specializing in Russian and Soviet history, also highly publicized and published, that is, and respected in her field. I wanted to see if we could think historically about this. Because one thing that I'm always wondering about, I mean, I know a lot of my colleagues are looking at the current events, and that's very important, but I'm always trying to think about what's the historical geography of all this, the context. Are there parallels to what's going on right now that can give us insight?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And, you know, as an historian, again, I'm very bad at predicting the future. If even the analysts on February 21st, whose job it is to predict things, can't predict things, then historians, really, we don't predict things. That's just not what we do. But what's interesting to me is that there are so many different historical parallels that one might be able to draw on here. And, you know, Dr. Koropkov pointed out very pertinently, I think that what we might be looking at here is something new, right? The idea in the post-Soviet space that the Slavic nations of, sort of what, Little Russia, Great Russia, and White Russia, would, which is kind of an older construct, but nonetheless an idea that those nations in particular belong together. I mean, that is in some sense new, because both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union understood themselves to be these huge multi-ethnic spaces. And if you think about the Cold War, we feared, the Soviet expansion more than anything. There was this concept that the Soviet Union's job was to just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and expand as much as it could, turn the whole world communist, think about world revolution. So what's interesting is that both the Soviet context and the Russian imperial context are about the advancement of territory in a huge multi-ethnic empire. And here we might be talking about something that's quite different. And I think that is an interesting moment to think about, the idea that on the one hand, history can show us some of the ways that people thought about things in the past, and some of the most important ideas of how people and events unfolded. But sometimes something new comes into the arena. And it's fascinating to me because history is about change over time. What's fascinating is the idea of thinking, okay, in the last, sort of since 2007, or, in the last 15 years, the Russian state has been imagining itself in ways that are, of course, drawing on older traditions, but also something that's new. And I'm fascinated by the way in which these sort of new, you have Dugin, you have these other ideas about Slavic empire, about Christianity. This sort of the certainly in the 1840s, Nicholas I embraced the idea of autocracy, orthodoxy, and sort of narodnost, or sort of national identity. But this is not, and this draws on that. I mean, this is obviously the same three parts altogether. But at the same time, the empire under Nicholas I was constantly attempting to expand, whether, there was, moving into Central Asia and moving, beyond. So Poland, so it's an interesting sort of question about which historical example is the one that really helps us to think through to what's happening and what the next step is, right? If nobody knows what the plans are, which historical example is the one that's the most useful, right? And so I've been thinking about many different historical examples. Nicholas I, of course, is a really good one, because that's where you do see this idea of orthodoxy, sort of creating kind of an orthodox national vision, or at least one place in Russian history where you see that. But so I think that's something that's still on the table, that we need to think about. But there are many other historical examples that one could point to. And one that already Dr. Koropkov brought up was Putin and Stalin, right? That is to say, this question of what is going on in the political, one of the most unexpected things of this past month and a half is, to my mind anyway, and I have spent the majority of my career studying Stalinism. So I think that if it's a surprise to me, it is surprising broadly, which is the extent to which the freedoms that had been, sort of spun out over 30 years have been retracted in a very short space of time. Now, I think, of course, this has been coming for a long time. One can sort of see the echoes of it. But the idea that there has been such a political consolidation under Putin in the last, sort of few years, I think is really remarkable and noteworthy, because after all, Stalin's 1930s and the Russian 20 teens are a very different time period. You had capitalism, sort of doing reasonably well. You had an economy that struggled in rural areas, but was very successful in urban ones. You have the development of this 20% of the people who are, the maybe not 20%, but a large group of people who are white collar, urban, cosmopolitan, dare I use the word, in that, not in the negative sense, but in the idea that these are folks who are world citizens and are not necessarily kind of stuck in stuck in a Russian context. So that's a dramatically different demography than what you had in the 1930s under Stalin. But it is remarkable that you're seeing this, to me, that you're seeing this political consolidation, a consolidation that includes almost no freedom of the press, whereas there had been sort of nominal freedom of the press before. I mean, I'm not sure now, I don't know exactly the status of the internet, whether there are any websites that are not blocked. Now, of course, people in the know can get a VPN, but that again requires a certain level of sophistication and knowledge to be able to do that. So you really do see the kind of the closing down of the information world to something that is very tightly controlled. And I think that is, that's sort of remarkable, but it is interesting to kind of think about that, that problem. And you do see that Putin then has fallen into the trap of totalitarianism, which is that your advisors don't dare to tell you when things are bad, and you make mistakes because because you're isolated by and everybody is too frightened to tell you the truth, right? So we do see some element of that kind of totalitarian conceptual, totalitarian government, and I'm very surprised about that. So those are just two. I mean, I can spin out many others, and I will maybe I'll throw out one or two more historical comparisons. So just to kind of review, we have the sort of the question of political power, Stalinism and Putinism, right? That's something that I think is well worth kind of deliberating on. There's the question of do we have an empire that's just a Slavic empire, or do we have an empire that is a multinational, ever-growing, expanding empire? And in the case of it just being a Slavic empire, you have the problem, of course, that the Russian Federation is a multi-ethnic state, right? So how do you think about, obviously Chechnya was sort of turned into rubble in order to be contained, but there are other ethnicities within the Russian Federation, and so how to think about the multi-ethnicity in this supposedly new Russocentric or Rossiyski, if not Ruski, project. That's something to kind of think about. The other thing to think about in terms of Putin and rule is how the isolation and lack of information that has been run through the whole society also affects decision making at the top. The third thing I would like to think about is my historian colleagues and I for the past month and a half have been playing the question, which war is this, right? Is this World War II? Is this Afghanistan? Is this the Crimean War? Somebody, is this the Russo-Japanese War? And in recent days, of course, the Russo-Japanese War comes to mind, when the Russian Empire sailed its navy around the world in order to have the Battle of Tsushima destroy the entire Russian navy. So the loss of the it's the Moskva, right? That's the name of the ship. The loss of the Moskva, just even if it doesn't really mean that this is the Russo-Japanese War, which of course it doesn't, nonetheless, it brings up this historic resonance of this question of the military so overconfident that they could sort of defeat this enemy, that they are bungling the situation militarily, right? I mean, I think that is an important historical precedent, and we see that, of course, in Russo-Japanese War is a very obvious case. You can look at the beginning of World War I, or the other war that chases the Russian state the way that the Vietnam War chases the United States is Afghanistan, right? And I think that you sort of think about. I've been thinking about Afghanistan a lot. Just in terms of thinking about the morale of the troops, the complete incapacity to supply them, the embarrassment, the reports of troops eating dogs because they don't have food. I mean, just the kind of failure to run an army in the proper way. is evident in those historical examples of Afghanistan and the Russo-Japanese War, and I do think that raises a set of historical problems and questions for the Russian state as well. I had some other historical thoughts, but I think I'm willing to kind of let it open up to questions now. And I mean, unless you have a specific question on something I covered.
I think those are really great examples, and I tell you that one of the things that I was thinking about is that it just seems like there's a pattern of these types of Russian invasions that are that they did not accomplish annexation on a grand scale or victory on a grand scale, and it seems like a lot of this, from my perspective as a Latin Americanist, meaning that I don't have the Eurasian history under my belt very well yet. But as an outsider, it seems like they have a long history of intervening, overstretching, and not holding that territory. But they also have a long history of holding territory, as you mentioned, Central Asia, and of course after World War II, and they were able to take over Eastern and Central Europe too. So it's hard to tell which of these this is. I mean, Putin's not exactly Hitler because he's not, there's not the same kinds of circumstances that Germany was dealing with after World War I that would explain Hitler's expansionism into Eastern Europe. But and so maybe this is a totally new thing.
Can I drop in there? Because one of the things I did want to say, I mean, one of the things, I mean, yes, you could make a historical comparison to Hitler, but what's really striking, and I think that is an interesting question, because actually the idea of who's a Nazi, who's a fascist, is absolutely relevant to the way in which Putin is building this war, because one of the essential things in terms of Hitler's rule was the idea of a superiority of race, right? And that was central to everything that Hitler did in incredibly devastating ways for many different populations all across Eastern Europe. But here, because of this idea that Ukrainians they're not a nationality, they're really us. You can't use that they're a superior, they're an inferior race, because they're us. Right? If there are brothers, they're the same race as us. They're not a different race. They're not different inherently. And so the only difference that Putin can muster is this idea of they're fascists, right? They're Nazis, they're fascists. They are different because of their political ideology. And that is the political ideology that the Soviet Union defeated victoriously in 1945, and we're going to defeat it now. And so they have to other the Ukrainians in some way. And the way they have chosen to do it is in a very historical way, is in adopting the language of World War II and making the Ukrainians fascists.
I have a comment or question here, Karen, if I may. Growing up in Soviet Union, where I spent half of my life, I know more than Americans do how was this cult of Second World War victory built up. I was named Victor because I was born on May 9th, 10 years after the war ended. And so were thousands of others. So Putin's regime, as we know, went to unbelievable stretches to maintain this cult, down to brainwashing of small kids in genuinely North Korean style. So I think we are seeing much of it, because those soldiers now committing atrocities in Ukraine are essentially next generation of those who did this in Chechnya. Too much time has passed historically. So I personally don't have much hope for this generation with or without defeat or Marshall Plan or whatever. What say you about future?
That's a really excellent question, and it's interesting because I very much see your point. In fact, that's what I'm working on now, is the way in which the sort of historical war memory is being used to mobilize children. I mean, they're doing war games. They're doing sort of bringing children to. I personally witnessed a tour of kindergartners of a World War I museum in St. Petersburg, outside of St. Petersburg, in Tsarskoye Selo, where they were essentially teaching these tots. They were, 4 or 5 years old, teaching them about what the proper role in the war is and how the boys were going to be soldiers and the girls were going to be nurses. They even had bandages where they were bandaging, having the little girls bandage the little boys. So I do absolutely understand what you're saying, right? And they have war games. They have these three-dimensional panoramas. And all kinds of things that are making war into a game and attracting children. I think all of that is absolutely there. But I, as somebody who, and maybe I'm too naive and too not optimistic, but I always, yes, you can indoctrinate children, maybe. But I find that the people's resiliency and independence, both in the Soviet Union and now, didn't necessarily, like, there's a level of brainwashing and then there's a level of doubt and stepping away. And maybe I'm overestimating or hoping against hope that there's enough of that kind of resistance to the state imposition, as much as there is this intent. The state intends to do this, no question. But whether the people receiving the indoctrination are in fact receiving it the way the state wants it is something I've always had a question about. And I have a question about that under Stalinism, certainly in the later part of the Soviet Union. I don't know if you're familiar with Alexei Yurchak's work, Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. It's a really interesting analysis of how in the late Soviet Union, people said all the right words that the state wanted and did something completely differently, so that when the Soviet Union unraveled in 1991, or as it was unraveling and under glasnost, people just went right along with the unraveling, right? Because they had already sort of distanced themselves in these many different ways. So maybe I'm too much of an optimist, and I hope you're wrong and I'm right, but I don't know that I'm right.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions to Karen, please, everyone?
I definitely have some, but so if nobody has one, Anara?
Yeah, I actually sent this question because today I listened to, I watched Grigory Yavlinsky, and he said that West missed an opportunity, a window of opportunity since 2014, that instead of offering a Marshall Plan for Ukraine and other, probably, I think, post-Soviet republics, they miss this opportunity to contribute more into reforms in Russia and in Ukraine. And also in general, he also talked about present day sanctions and beginning from the 2014 and present day sanctions. And he believed that it was all these sanctions are not effective. And that's why actually we're not productive. And my question to Andrei, what he thinks, Andrei, what do you think about this actual reaction, and what is your own opinion?
Sanctions can have different goals. They can aim at dismantling a particular branch of the economy or weakening the economy in general. They can create general pressure on the population with the idea, population will react at some point, there would be enough pressure to remove the ruler. They can be aimed at the elites with the goal of, at best, of the internal coup. Right now we see all kinds of sanctions. They're sectoral, they're aimed at weakening modern industries in Russia. They are financial, they're aimed at destabilizing the financial system. They are hurting the elite, and they are aimed at making life of the population in general worse. I already mentioned it. I think that, first of all, the original premise of such sanctions does not work in Russia right now, because we have seen that civil society was basically destroyed, and the elite is under the total Putin control. Ironically, these anti-elite sanctions to me are counterproductive, because they increase Putin's control over the elite, and they hurt, first of all, those groups of people who are the most pro-Western and anti-war one. It became impossible to travel to the West. Well, the majority of the population didn't travel to the West. It was traveling to Thailand, Egypt, and Turkey to research. They can do it the same way they were doing before the sanctions were adopted. So the sanctions are not effective in regards to creating pressure on the Kremlin from either elite or the population in general. Sanctions aimed at the weakening of the Russian economy will be effective. They will be devastating for the high-tech and military industry, by the way. But again, it will take time. They will have no bearing on the conduct of this war for at least a year, maybe more. And therefore, these sanctions, for the most part, increase standing of Western governments. They have demonstrated the unity of the West. But in terms of their final goals, they, for the most part, will not achieve those goals that were declared.
Dr. Schray, did you have something you wanted to ask?
I did not. I just wanted to thank Karen for that great explanation about, like, I never quite understood the insistence on denazification, and I just appreciate the way you contextualized and explained how if they're saying we're one people, then of course they can't other us. I mean, I just really found that incredibly useful, and it just makes me appreciate all of our guests, because from a political science perspective, history perspective, a psychiatric perspective, it's when we have experts from different fields come together, so many insights just kind of occur that wouldn't naturally occur. But I'm especially grateful to you. This is probably our 7th or 8th panel discussion, and every single one, I just get more and more insights. I'm just very grateful to you. I'm very grateful to both of you, actually. Thank you so much.
I can join this and thank everyone. It's really remarkable that that you all agree to come to our improvised panels. What we are doing, I really don't know if anyone is doing regular panels like this. If you hear about some, please connect us, because we can exchange speakers and ideas. We started as probably educational platform with an idea that our students will benefit from this in future, but I think we already, with your help, are creating some kind of body of information which will persist and will be educational, maybe useful for you as historians at this point, because in a month from now or in a year from now, you might want to look back at what you said and what we asked at these moments, because nobody really knows. This future is changing as we speak at every point. Someone coined the image of points of no return fusing into one trajectory and creating unpredictability. Chris, any more questions?
I noticed that I have a few students here from my classes, and I just wanted to encourage them to ask any questions that you might have.
Sure.
And while we're waiting on that, I had one question that I don't think we've broached very much, and maybe it's because people are afraid to toil with this question, and that is the potential role of the U.S. military getting involved, because, let me present this. A U.S. military officer, friend of mine, presented the idea of, instead of having a no-fly zone or actually sending U.S. troops to fight over there, which is, it's an unthinkable thing for the most part. What about the idea of an enclave just inside Western Ukraine that would be manned by U.S. troops, and in order to defend refugees, to receive refugees, maybe to some type of a safe zone. So instead of waiting for Russia to push beyond Ukraine into one of the NATO countries, instead we actually have kind of a forward area inside there that would be like a halfway measure.
Well, I can partly respond to it, and I think it's extremely dangerous. It already happened. There was a U.S. training center on the border with Poland, and it was hit by a Russian missile about probably 2 weeks ago. And it was done deliberately. It was a signal that we're not afraid. We will go after any Western advisors, volunteers who are in Ukrainian territory, and we'll kill them. If we don't kill them, then we will not treat them as POWs if they are captured. And there were two scary aspects to this action. First, it was a deliberate attack aimed at killing Western experts. And second, it was a strike in a distance of about 12 miles from the Polish border. So it was quite possible that there would be a mistake and this missile would hit the Polish border, so the NATO territory. And Putin sent a very clear signal that he wasn't afraid of doing that. More than that, there is such a Russian, political advisor, Belkovsky. He suggested that Putin might have another thing in mind if the war doesn't go well, to use tactical nuclear weapon in Western Ukraine, strike on Lviv. And it would create a very interesting situation when technically Russia is not at war with NATO, is not using nuclear weapons against them, but the wind would blow to Europe, and essentially, while weapon will be used on Ukrainian territory, Europe will become vulnerable. So there is always a danger of escalation, and I think Putin has shown very clearly that he is willing to escalate the conflict. So any involvement on the part of the West right now can lead to this conflict basically losing any control over it.
Can I sort of pop in here with a question more than a comment, right? Which is that obviously one of the reasons why we're having all these panels, and one of the reasons why it matters so much, is that we're all horrified at the outbreak of war when a war that was an elective war, a war by choice. And the question is like, the burning question is, how can you stop it? As your point is well taken. Any military involvement of the United States has the potential to escalate, and there is therefore extremely dangerous. The sanctions are, they're all over the place. They're going to take time, but Putin and the Russian military, who are willing to go in and fight, are willing to do it now before the sanctions really have the bite that they will eventually have. And so, is the world just going to, this is the question, the historical question. I'm currently teaching a course on the Holocaust, and the question, that historical question is the world just going to stand by and watch this happen, right? And what traction, what leverage, what possibility does the West have, or does the West and its allies have to make this stop? And is there anything?
The problem and the tragedy of this situation is that there's only one man who knows what the plan is. Literally just one person. And this person is a tactician. Putin is a very good tactical player. He never was a strategist. So we don't know what did he envision, what is the final goal. And I'm not sure that, there is a clearly defined final goal. It evolves along with tactics based on the evolving situation. And that's the worst aspect of it, because we don't know how to prevent or stop it, because we don't know what does he see as the positive end for himself? Is it taking, say, Donbas and recognition of Crimea and Donbas now as parts of Russia? Is it taking significantly larger territories? I think that he will not now accept anything, not including the land corridor to the Crimea. But it might go further. It depends on how it all evolves and what kind of weapons are being used in the future. Would it be, say, Kharkiv? Or would it be the left bank, Ukraine? Would it be the land corridor to Transnistria? And that would mean that Ukraine would completely lose its access to the sea, would become a landlocked country. And clearly, Putin is also trying to play other games here, talking to Orban and pushing him to claim, say, the Hungarian areas of Ruthenia, of Transcarpathia. I can tell you that, say, when I was studying at Moscow State University many, many years ago, we had a research station in the Carpathian Mountains, and it was a former weekend house of Miklos Horthy, the dictator of regent of Hungary. So everything is very mixed there, and Putin is trying to push all those players, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, to look at Ukraine and have second thoughts about the existing borders. He is also in play, it's clear, with China. And again, I'll repeat it, that's the worst aspect of this situation. We don't know what the final goal is, what the game is. And if it is so, very hard to negotiate and very hard to, propose any action that would potentially stop it. Not a very pleasant picture.
Right, but we're right in the thick of it right now. So it makes sense that it wouldn't be pleasant. There's a lot of death and destruction that's taking place, unfortunately. But obviously, having these types of intellectual discussions and listening to testimonies from people who are involved on the ground too, this combination is what we're really about, so that we can raise awareness and hopefully contribute to the improvement of civilization. That's how I see our role as academics too, even if we're, because without those ideas, then there isn't really any direction. So, and ideas obviously motivate people to action. Victor, Anara, Stefan, do any of you have any last questions before we close up?
Just then, great thanks to all of our speakers. Thank you again for coming, and we hope people will be listening. We had almost 300 views of our last recording, and this has taken some root. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was amazing.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good day.
I learned a lot. Thanks so much, Karen and Andre. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And of course, to Galina, who had to leave us a little bit ago.
Yes. And everybody have a good holiday season.
Have a great
You too, Victor.
Thank
We'll
you.
see everybody next Friday.
All right. Bye-bye.
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 This was great.